Mr. Barthels, why do you invest only in OECD countries?
Because it's, for us, it's easier to do it that way. The OECD countries are the countries that are organized in a certain fashion, that display and produce certain amounts of, a certain quality of data, economic data, which actually then gets accumulated in Paris basically by the OECD directly. And therefore basically all the data that coming out of these countries is easier comparable. If you look at emerging market countries, countries that are not part of the OECD so far, they have different standards to calculate certain measurements that are important for us. Let's take, for instance, consumer prices, price inflation. If you actually compare consumer price inflation, let's say in Peru, from Peru with the ones actually in the United States, you come up with both are inflation numbers, but both are calculated in a completely different fashion, so they're not directly comparable. If you actually look at OECD countries, OECD numbers are directly comparable with each other basically, so you compare apples with apples as opposed to apples with oranges, to take that synonym in this instance. That's why we focus on these, because we're very small. We are only we are still a very small boutique. Overall 60 people, yes, but in itself basically for the research unit that we are currently sporting is anywhere between 6 and 8 people, depending which way you actually start counting that one. And for that, we couldn't actually handle anything else. Plus our experience from a portfolio management side really is only developed markets, and we like to stick to the things basically that we have known better for the last 20, 30 years.
Okay. But are you not afraid that the correlations in the development markets are too high?
Well, the correlations are very high, granted, but I mean that is just like an event that was actually like triggered by default of Lehman Brothers. Because Lehman Brothers was kind of like, I mean, setting everything to zero, and the collapse that followed afterwards was a global collapse. And since then, basically everything was more or less correlated. So you really have differences there. At this stage in time, however, basically we start to observe basically that some of the correlation is actually going away. Now, for instance, one of the best examples, for instance, is really the topic of my presentation that I was just giving here in Eindhoven, was really that we were talking about like, well, converging divergence, so to speak. So while the economies, the United States economy and the Eurozone economy were really diverging, so the United States was growing much stronger, while the Eurozone economy was actually like still weak last year, we're starting to see right now basically that this divergence is coming back together a little bit. By the Eurozone economy starting to pick up due to the nature of the quantitative easing that the ECB has initiated now, and that the US economy is starting to slow down a little bit, not so much because of the explicit tightening by the Federal Reserve, but rather by the implicit tightening through the appreciating US dollar. That really has like led towards like some dampening effect on the US economy, and now we're actually like seeing these two economies starting to converge again.
Okay. And do you have some preferences for equities in certain regions or countries?
Well, what we are expecting to see at the moment, as I said, I mean, the US is slowing down, what we are seeing at the moment, and the Federal Reserve is ready to start hiking rates, which is always a bad timing actually for the equity market. Now, if they will really start hiking rates, is clearly something that one could easily debate. And I mean, we take the view that if the Fed starts hiking, it will only be 1 or 2 rate hikes, if even that basically, and then they won't doing anything. While in the Eurozone, basically, we have a very, very accommodative central bank with the ECB doing QE for at least another 14 months. So at least Draghi has said on the last press conference, and that in itself will fuel the equity markets, particularly in the core European areas. Core Europe for us really is by and large Germany, of course, and of course Holland and Austria. These 3 economies basically are the core at the moment, and they will start growing because the monetary policy by the ECB is for these 3 economies alone not really appropriate. The rates should be significantly higher, but they're not, because the ECB will have to look at the overall Eurozone, and there basically there's still lots of growth that needs to take place in the southern European countries before we can start talking about hiking ever again.
Okay. Finally, last question. Do you see differences in valuation for small, mid and large caps?
Of course there are differences, but I mean the differences basically are very often justifiable basically with a difference in liquidity in these instances. So for large investors, even if we look at our three funds, the three funds are also investing in different segments of the market. For the active, which has now a volume of 11 billion, it doesn't make sense looking at small and or sometimes mid caps, but small cap companies we don't really look at this stage in time for that fund. While the dynamic, which is still quite small with little over 200 million assets under management, there we still look at small size companies basically. And there, of course, there's some value picking to be done. There we really do like a bottom up approach in that area. Look at valuations, look at research, look at our own valuation models basically, and try to pick the raisins in that one.
Okay, Mr. Barthels, thanks for the interview.
Thank you.